The knees are a very valuable piece of your body. You only get one pair. They're a very complicated, fascinating joint. And I think for many of us, we take them for granted until something happens to them and we start to get pain. And this happens to many of us for many different reasons, whether we're sports people or whether we just twist the knee getting out of a car one day or maybe on a dog walk. And we start to get pain and it becomes chronic, and it can really cause an enormous amount of not just physical but also mental suffering because we use our knees all the time. And suddenly we've literally been kneecapped, and every time we move, potentially things don't feel stable or they hurt. And there are many things that can go wrong with the knee, and there are many more common problems. So for example, degeneration of the cartilage and maybe tearing of the meniscus on the inside portion of the knee that can cause us in our yoga practice to get disheartened, to struggle, and maybe to not necessarily know how far to push it because you don't want another knee episode. And if anybody's had knee problems in the past, you'll know what I'm talking about, where you can get swelling and pain for a month or more until it goes down and returns to some level of normality. And this is very difficult for many of us. And from my own experience, some of you may be aware that I had 2 knee problems. I had an unstable horizontal tear in both of my medial meniscus, and I had arthroscopies some years ago now, but before that I was practicing with essentially a lot of the time with knee discomfort or in some cases pain, and I had to find ways to modify my practice so that I wasn't making anything worse, should we say, so that I was very aware of how I was moving my body in such a way that my knee remained stable and yet I could still practice. Because, as I mentioned, we take our knees for granted, and if we don't really understand what a pose is asking us to do, we can easily overload the knee and overburden the knee, and eventually the knee just gives up. It just says, oh, I've had enough of this. I can't take any more pressure from the hip joint or any lack of stability from the ankle joint, and I'm just going to break down, and then you'll really have to look after me, like an overburdened mother, perhaps. Okay. So this class will be for people who want to learn to look after their knees and become more aware of them, and also perhaps for people who already have pre-existing knee issues and would like to understand how to take care of them better in their practice. So hopefully for many of us. Now, I'll be offering some modifications as we go along, as well as some tips. Please, if you have a knee issue and you already know what you can and cannot do, then please be sensible about this and don't push yourself into things that you know are going to cause you discomfort, pain, and potential further damage. And also, if you've been advised by a specialist, I say specialist because I'd rather a knee specialist advise you than a GP, because GPs have very little idea of the knees. But if you do have someone who knows what they're talking about, and maybe a physiotherapist, they've told you to avoid specific poses, then please do. Okay, so let's start off by standing up. Not often where we start in a Ashtanga Vinyasa class, but that's where we're going to begin today. Just quickly, a couple of things that we can perhaps do just to become more aware of the knees. One of them is a very simple balance pose. So if we just lift up, we'll start with the right leg just to break with tradition. So if we lift up the left leg and then pop the hands underneath the left thigh, and then just let the left leg hang there. And although this is a balance pose, this is mostly for the left knee. And this can feel really good to give some space to the inside of the knee joint, which is often what it needs. And I'm hoping that you're breathing, although this may not officially be a yoga pose. It's really useful if you use the same techniques. So Ujjayi pranayama would be employed. And you can also slightly wobble to the side. So if this feels good and you just let the leg hang, you can kind of wobble this to the side. You could do this sitting in a chair potentially if you found the balance more difficult. And this can feel really good for creating some space in the knee joint. Let's do the other side. You can obviously pause this and spend longer. Move weight across to the left foot. Lift up the right leg. Again, just cup up behind the back of the knee and let the leg hang there. So space in the knee joint there. Breathe. So one thing that can happen in the knee is that we can feel as though things have become pressed together, like in a sort of tiddlywink effect, and this can manifest in pinching, particularly when we close the knee during yoga poses. It can feel like there's pain maybe on the inside or the outside of the knee. And one of the solutions to this is creating extra space through various ways. This is one way. Another way is to wrap a towel or a small hand cloth under the back of the knee, and then when you draw the knee closed, that will actually create more space in the knee joint. So if you're we'll just put that leg down. So if you're nearly ready to do lotus or half lotus, which it might be, and it might be something that you're working on, and you've had a knee injury, that's a great way to protect the inside of the knee, but also work into the hip. Let's bring the feet together, and then we're going to bend the knees and just pop the hands onto the knees like so. Okay. And so bending the knees is obviously a really good thing to do because it stabilizes the joint. One of the things we're going to be emphasizing in this class is not locking the legs. So if you just pop your hands onto the knees and we're just going to make small circular movements, which again are actually really quite good for the knees. There's a little bit of rotation in the knee available. I'm currently going clockwise. I'm just going from side to side. Like so. And it's not a big movement, it's just a little movement, and you're listening to your body as you go. And of course, if you feel any sharp pains, then you don't want to be doing this. So if your body says no, then I'd listen to it. Don't listen to me. I know my own body, and I've experimented when I had pain and occasional discomfort, which I still get, but your issue may be very different from mine, so please don't consider me an expert in your pain. However, some of the things I offer may be helpful, so I'm just moving from side to side, like that. Maybe we'll just switch back again. It's not about how big the movements are, just small movements are good, big movements probably less good if you're suffering. Okay. And then if we just make the feet about hips width apart, and then if we drop down, so just before we do something else, so we're going to drop into a squat. Okay, now you get to decide about squatting. So for some of you, you might find that fully loading the knee in a closed position is not going to be good for you. Some people might have the heels up. And if you're recovering from an injury, you may find there's swelling in the knee, and this you can't do this. So maybe if you're struggling, that a yoga mat underneath the back of the knees like so. I'm just going to use my hands to mimic that. That can be a really good way of starting to do some squatting. So, or you can use a towel, perhaps. And if your heels are not on the floor, you can also be on a brick or a block. Okay, but any kind of squatting is normally really good. That's what I found when I was struggling with my knees. Although I felt a lot of pressure in my knees, actually squatting gave me some relief in the long term. So. This isn't going to be something I'm going to stay in for a long time. In fact, it's really just a transition to sit down. And what we're going to do sitting down is we're going to make the legs into a sort of Z shape of sorts. So I'm just bringing my left leg in front of my groins, and my right leg pulling into the outside. So what you'll notice is my right leg is spun internally, my left leg is spun externally there. Okay, and I'm going to show you how to work the feet later on in the class. For the time being, what I'm hopeful of there is the knees are happy. Okay, so we're not loading, once we've folded the knees, we're not loading them with a forward bend, which is often what causes pain. It's not usually the closing of the knee, but it's often the combination of a closure of the knee and then also loading it into